Hey everyone! This video is going to show you a simple Git workflow that involves creating a new repository on GitHub, then creating a project within that repository, making changes to it on your computer, and pushing those changes up to the repository on GitHub. This assumes that you've gone ahead and installed Git, as well as created a GitHub account, and done the 15-minute try Git tutorial. If you haven't yet, you can find the links for those steps in the video description, and then just use this video as a reference if you get confused or you want to see things happening in real time. So sign into GitHub and click on your username in the upper right. Then go to your repositories tab right here. We're going to create a new repository. You can give it a name, a short description. By default, all repositories are public on GitHub. You can pay for a private repository. You're going to click Initialize this repository with a README. It's a good idea to have a README file on each of your repositories with a brief description of what the project is. So here's an example of my final project from Dev Bootcamp and the README associated with that project. You can see that it's a description of the project itself, kind of like an advertisement. It tells people that we're open source, we welcome improvements, and it lists the names of the people who created the project. So create repository. Now I have a repository called Codecademy project. Here's that README, and it has the description that I put in before. Over here on the right, you'll either see it say SSH clone URL or HTTPS clone URL. When you set up GitHub, you had to choose one of these two formats, and I recommended to you using SSH, so that way you didn't have to provide your username and password every time you try and push up to GitHub. Regardless, choose whatever format you set your GitHub up with, and then copy the URL to your clipboard. So at this point I'm going to start using the terminal, and if you've never used this before, it might seem a bit intimidating, like a foreign language. I highly recommend Zed Shaw's Learn Command Line the Hard Way tutorial. It'll take you about 1 or 2 days to complete. You'll no longer be afraid of the command line afterwards. It is a bit dry, it's a lot of memorization, but that's fine. It doesn't take you very long, and it just kind of gets you over that hump of being afraid or intimidated by using something that has no icons whatsoever. And that's a good point to make. There are graphical user interfaces or GUIs that you can use to do all of this, but you really want to try and switch to using the command line. It's what most professional web developers are using anyway, and there's nothing to be afraid of. So let's go back to terminal. You want to be in the directory you want your repository to be cloned down into. So I'm in my projects directory, and I'm going to use the command git clone and paste in the URL I just copied off of GitHub. Hit enter, and you'll see it clone down. And now if I look into my projects directory, I see I have 2 projects. The one I'm currently working on, 2048 clone, and then the new repository from GitHub, Codecademy project. We can go into that directory and see our README file that we created before. So I'm going to make a new file here called index.html, and within that I'm going to have a basic skeleton, just so we have something to push up to GitHub. What I did just there was create that file within terminal and then use a symlink connected to Sublime to just open up this file, empty file as you can see, within Sublime. How did I do that? Well, I'm going to include this link here in your video description as well so that you can go ahead and set that up. It's really useful to just be able to jump right from your terminal into Sublime like you saw me do. The other way you could do this was by coming into Sublime, doing File, New File, and saving it as index.html in the project directory that you had created earlier in terminal. So I'm going to go ahead and cheat a bit, copy and paste the basic skeleton that I had already made here, and save that within my index.html file. Now if we jump back to terminal, and we run a command called git status, you'll see a little notification here. Untracked files, index.html. What that's saying is that Git knows about our folder our Codecademy project folder, and it knows that a new file was created within that folder. And it's saying, hey, you don't have me tracking the changes that are being made to this file. You want Git to be tracking those changes so that every time you update your file and save something new, it knows about it and it can push those changes up to GitHub. So here's the workflow that you do to make that happen. First you add the file, and if you run git status, you'll see that now it's green and it says changes to be committed instead of untracked files. That's great. Now Git is watching the index.html file for any changes that happen within it. After you add a file, you commit it by saying git commit -m and then writing a short commit message in the present tense. Create basic HTML skeleton. Let's see what happens when we say git status. You can see our branch is ahead of origin master by 1 commit. What that translates to is that we have created a commit here on our computer locally, and when Git comparing this right here to our GitHub repository, that version does not have the same number of commits, right? What we did right here is not being reflected on GitHub. So if you're ever wondering if you've pushed everything that's on your computer up, you can run git status and see whether or not your local branch is ahead of the master branch on GitHub and by how many commits. So how do we make these things equal? How do we get the repository on GitHub to match what we have locally? Run git push origin master. Awesome. So now if we switch back to GitHub, we should be able to see those changes. Here's our repository from earlier. We had our README file 5 minutes ago, and that was it. If I refresh the page, now we have our index.html file. And you can actually click on this link and go ahead and see what you just pushed up to GitHub. You don't have to check git status in between every step, in between your git add and your git commit. I was running git status so that you could see the difference in the messages that you get. But more typically what will happen is someone will just say git add index.html and then git commit -m add content to body. Because I hadn't made any changes, that actually didn't do anything right there. Just putting it like that to illustrate how you don't have to use git status every single time. The other thing you don't have to do every time you commit is push to master. So I'll go several commits between pushing to master just because it takes a little bit of time and because I'm in the middle of a thought process. You do want to make frequent commits. You don't want to have a ton of code, 50 lines of code that are being committed all at one time. You should be breaking those down into smaller kind of thoughts. So maybe you just created a new method, great, commit that method. You don't necessarily have to push right after committing that method, but you do want to commit in very small chunks. So that's a really simple, bare bones version of the general process of pushing up to GitHub. There are ways to make this process more efficient. There's a lot more that you can do. We haven't even covered using different branches at all here, but this is going to get you started in terms of getting your Codecademy code up onto GitHub and getting comfortable with the basics of pushing and making commit messages. I encourage you to look up tutorials on the web that can show you more features, and let me know if you have any questions. Good luck!